On this episode of the show, I have with me Cameron Hattrick. She is the VP of Data and Insights at BetterUp, and we're going to be talking about the criticality of data and AI, and we're going to talk about some of the expectations out there right now, how workflows need more data, and we're going to talk about the storytelling. How do we help people tell the story to translate into some of these advanced technologies? We're going to talk a little bit about how do we address difficult workflows, and where do you start if you haven't started? If you have started, what are some things that Cameron has learned that she could share with you as well? Cameron, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. All right. Before we start, BetterUp, what do you guys do over there?
BetterUp is building the human transformation platform, which allows companies to give their employees access to many different tools so their employees can learn how to improve themselves in order to have peak performance at work.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. I mean, we probably could spend a whole episode talking about that mission, but this episode, we're going to be talking about the criticality of data in AI. Obviously, people are going to hear that and go, Mir, we know data is critical in AI. And I think that's one thing to understand how critical it is. I think sometimes when we're talking about AI, we're seeing a lot of movement. We're seeing it in places where it might look easier, right? And I actually think engineering teams right now are one of the biggest users of advanced AI tools, code generating tools and whatnot. And obviously they know the audience is very defined. The process is very defined. So you can actually go in there and make some of these enhancements for them. I guess when you're looking at your world and you're looking at the expectations around what AI can do. And what's funny is I think AI could also mean different things at different places, right? We could really be lumping Gen AI in LLMs, or we could be talking about some form of machine learning, but AI has become a catch-all. Talk about that catch-all and expectations with us.
Absolutely. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Is AI is meaning a lot of things to a lot of people. I think where we're seeing a lot of change in the industry is really in those replacing tasks with more of an AI assistance, whether it's like a co-pilot using Cursor to get code done and to do that faster, which I think about is like really kind of like a cost savings because people are able to work faster, but they're doing the same like work, but just with AI enablement. The other area that I'm starting to see is bringing AI to bring better quality of work. I think about this, if you think about like the financial ways of driving impact for the company, there's really driving revenue or decreasing costs. And it's really in that driving revenue category where I think that we're going to see more and more in the future, especially with generative AI, where it allows people to think faster, to think more strategically, to connect the dots faster. And so I'm seeing a lot of different applications, but more so in the areas where people are using AI to replace the human in a little bit or make the human faster is where the original success is what we're seeing here.
It's really interesting. I think the studies are coming out really fast and furious as to AI. I think we start hearing about AI being able to displace jobs. And then I think recently I read a report from MIT, same obviously we have this study that 90% of projects are failing, but also on the flip side, the realization is becoming is that AI might not replace human workers. It might provide productivity. It might provide more insights, more data at a faster availability. I don't want to call it real time, but just right. And I think what's interesting there is I think there's been a lot of discussion that AI will come in and do some things. And we look at the engineering teams, you mentioned Cursor. The engineering teams are dialed in. They're using these tools. They're getting more productive. Still not sure if they're being replaced, but they're becoming more productive. And I also think that they know this domain. The people writing these tools know this domain the best. They're going to produce tools that will help their community. When you look at your organizations that are out there trying to find this efficiency, you might have the data, but I think in the AI projects, the data is only the start. I mean, you need to understand the business function. You need to understand the workflow. You need to understand the actual job and function, because if we draw that analogy to the engineering team, coding something, writing test cases for something, deploying something, those are all nuance. If you just said, well, I'm just going to help you write code better, the engineers would be like, that's not going to help me. I guess the question in there for you is, when we're looking at companies and trying to address AI opportunities in their companies, is the starting point, I mean, it's always the business, but what in the business is it? Where do you start focusing to make sure that you're driving the project from the start correctly?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. My colleague recently put together a framework that talked about like showing complexity versus context, and it was showing that early projects that he's seeing the most success with is where there's actually lower complexity and lower context. And I think over time, AI will work its way up to higher complexity and higher context tasks, but we're obviously just not there yet. Somebody once described AI as like an intern. And the intern still needs direction from somebody who understands the mechanics of the business. So I'm using that framework in particular of like this context and complexity of how we are approaching AI, where it's like, okay, this is just give me a line of code for this, or help write this change into our production database, where we have low context and low complexity, and we're slowly working our way up into more and more. But I think that context really requires to have really clean, good, governed data. And until we're there, until a company is there, they're not going to be able to work their way up into that higher context of projects.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When we talk about having that type of data, I mean, I half jokingly sometimes say reporting and analytics is hard in and of itself.
It is.
It is hard. I guess when we look at AI and what we're trying to do with it, depending on what we're talking about, there's even a further disconnect from us being able to understand what that end state is supposed to be. I guess when you look at how critical data is, how complex it is already, and you mentioned simpler tasks, that it's going to get better. I get that 100%. When you are looking at a company, are you I guess, how do you go about, like, there's so many competing priorities right now that people want this solution. Do you look at, where do I have my best data? Do you look at the opportunity for the organization? Like, what are the criteria of going, okay, well, we pick this as our project or one of the projects we want to work on?
Yeah, I think you have to balance. We actually have like an impact calculator and a level of effort calculator. And so we want to both look at like what impact we're going to have to the business by doing this. Is it going to generate revenue? Is it going to save costs? What does that look like? How long is that savings going to last for, or that revenue going to generate? Is that multi-year period? And then against the level of effort, right? So I think when you're starting off, you're looking at those quick wins that have good sound bites that you can share across the organization to get buy-in, so that you can earn the right for bigger and bigger investments that are going to take more months to deliver. And so, I mean, I use the same framework when applying analytics. You look for places where you're going to have a good impact and the level of effort is not as big. And those become your first use cases where you can say, hey, look at what data actually did for the company. And I think it's going to be the same framework with AI. Definitely, if the data is bad, the level of effort to produce something is going to be pretty high too, or the impact it's going to have is going to be low because it's not going to be trustworthy. If people don't trust the output, they're not going to want to use it. And so therefore, it's not going to be the solution that you're looking for. So that's definitely in the picture, in the calculation of thinking like, okay, how are we still impacting the business? I think, the business fundamentals are not changing. We're still, producing revenue. We're supposed to like optimize costs. So in our work, and AI is just going to help accelerate that as we go through, and using that same framework that we've always used around what is the impact? What is the level of effort to be able to identify where to start first?
I like that. And I guess as we're kind of looking at, your stakeholders, and I guess, I actually did an episode around how we've always wanted to be able to tell the computer what to do for us. We've just never had the tools. We're good storytellers. Yeah. I guess that's the summary. And most stakeholders are great. They'll describe to you in natural language what their workflow is. Mm-hmm. The challenge for data or anybody in technology has been, how do you take all those great stories, and we've tried different ways, Kanban boards, capture user stories, all this stuff, and translate them into work that we can actually code, and we're successful.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure if you ask stakeholders, they're like, hey, there's still room. When you look at that, capturing that story for somebody's workflow, which has already been traditionally difficult, and we're looking at capturing it and potentially providing areas of opportunity to improve it, whatever that might be. I guess when you think about that, sitting with a stakeholder, understanding that their story and really being that agent of change for them, that's, I mean, it's not traditionally been easy, but right now with AI, what makes it even harder? What is it that would make that an even more difficult process?
Yeah, I think it reminds me a lot about when a stakeholder says, I just want this data point, right? Just give me this data point. You pull back and you ask more questions. And you're like, well, why do you want that data point? And then you learn that the data point doesn't match the goal that they're trying to do. And I think the same is going to be true in this situation is like, do you even need to be doing that workflow? Like, is that workflow really the root issue? So I think at the heart of it is really understanding like, what is the larger goal? And how do we actually simplify it and reimagine the workflow rather than just replace all the steps with like automation? Like, how do you evaluate if we should still do it? If there's a root issue that this is just a Band-Aid for, solve that root issue instead? Or how do we reimagine and not necessarily just replicate the workflow, but actually think of a new way to provide the same value to the stakeholder? And you have to manage the stakeholder through that, right? Because they're going to say, I just wanted this. And you're going to be like, that's great, I understand, but I want more. Like, we need to back up. Don't tell me what you need me to build. Let's talk about what the problem is and what the goal should be here. And let's reimagine what's possible.
That's fantastic. And it made me think about how people, when they do their job, it becomes habit for them. Like, it becomes a routine. We know the job. Like, we know the processes. We become comfortable with the processes. Even if the processes isn't correct, we're still comfortable with the repetition and the muscle memory of it. When it comes to stakeholders and they meet this particular data point or they want something because it's urgent in their world, I think it's interesting because I don't think, from my days, I'll speak for myself, so I don't want to talk for other people. As somebody who worked in data, I would maybe not actually try to understand what that tribal drive was for needing that, because there's something they need to do that. Because another company may not need that data point. Specific to the stakeholder, specific what the need is now, the urgency of it, I need it yesterday. If it's that urgent, why didn't we know 6 months ago? I think all those things, some of those you push back, some of those you question, but also to actually go, as you said, is there something wrong with the process? Because if the process is broken and it's driving a need, can we do more? And when we're talking about something like AI, where we want at the beginning a human in the loop, and we want that set of eyes to look at what's going on, when you think about how some of these workflows for somebody's world has multiple steps, and then all of a sudden you've got to bring in a different stakeholder and make sure their workflow, I mean, it almost seems like we're moving back to where technology was 20, 30 years ago, where we need to be way more business minded. The role of the business analyst has gone away because all the tech people do it now. But part of me thinks that we need to bring that role back. We need to bring analysts that are just way more functional into orgs to understand some of these like semantic differences.
Yeah, there's a lot of systems thinking here, right? Because we've built organizations that are lots of people, and there's lots of handoffs, and there's lots of like intertwined like activities. And so I don't think you're just going to be replacing a workflow within one function. I think that it could be across multiple functions that you're going to have to map across and understand the entire system. It's a huge skill of perspection, right? And to be thinking through like, okay, if I do this, what's the larger picture going to mean? Who else is this impacting? Who do I need to bring in the room? How do I need to like pull it all together? Sometimes I think that smaller companies are going to have the advantage here of building AI first versus replacing some of the workflows in a larger company to be able to get there. But you're going to have to untwine all those things and understand the mechanics of how does it impact the basics of the business. It's really important to me and my team that my team understands the basics of the business. So we study, like today I did a session on understanding the P&L and the cash flow statement to help them understand the basics and to speak the business language. And I think we're going to need to see more and more of that. I don't see that many people in the tech world unless you're the founder or in the strategy team, who understand all those like parts of the business, the language of the business as deeply as I think they're going to need to, as we untangle some of these things that we're going to have to replace with AI.
Yeah, I think 100% spot on. I feel that the business side of technology, I think for a lot of engineering projects that went Scrum, we, by virtue of Scrum, have pushed a lot of that onto the quote unquote product owners. And we've asked them to do that. And that's fine. But there's this weird thin line of still translation that happens in secret, and for the technology people, whether you're a data and engineer, you do all your, anyways. But I feel that relationship has kind of split through the years in technology. You're saying we might need to actually marry them back together. I guess when we're looking at your team, people on your team, you mentioned trying to teach them P&L. I mean, for us to get more effective at delivering just better solutions, I think that's a great thing. To deliver AI solutions, which is really a lot of business workflow optimization and enhancement. Yeah. When you look at that and you mentioned you have a framework to look at what's going to work for your team. Do you ever look at your team and go, hey, I don't want to put them in a position of trying to pick a project that we just aren't ready for? And it's not just relative maybe to your team, but just technology teams in general haven't done it. It's a new functional area. We don't have the understanding. I mean, I'd imagine that would make me pause for a second to make sure we could understand that domain.
Absolutely. What I also think about in addition to that is like, what is the next person going to do with this? We're not the last mile delivery as a data team. We're giving recommendations. Is that next stakeholder actually going to take my recommendation and actually do something with it? Because otherwise then what's the point of what we do if someone's not going to act upon it? If we're not the person that's putting that into play. And so I think those are a lot of things you have to consider of like, you can look at things in isolation, like, should I do this? Will it impact the business? But it's really also, and is the next person down the line in delivery set up to be able to help me here too? Like, what is that level of complexity that's going to be needed for not just me, but for them to be able to actually do this?
That's fantastic. I guess from your experience, have you seen pitfalls along this AI journey that you're like, you know what, these are things that I definitely know we could have learned from, or these are things that I would have, if I had to do it all over again, would have thought differently about?
Not yet. I'm kind of the mindset that everything's a learning example. And so if we set ourselves up to learn, I love this term that you fail successfully. So even if we fail, I see it as a success because we're learning on what works along the way. So to me, those are things to celebrate and not necessarily to count it as a failure at this point in time. I think especially with generative AI, we're still so new that trying a bunch of things and having a bunch of successful failures is part of the success. That's part of the journey right now that we're seeing. And so right now it's experimentation like crazy to see what works where and how does this actually add value to the picture, or is it just a fun to do, or is it actually something that's going to drive value for the company?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been talking about digital transformation for a long time.
Yeah.
And up to now, I've struggled with this. I've talked about this on episodes, and I've never quite understood my own self. And at some point, I started realizing a lot of this digital transformation were just technologists talking about the transformation from a technology standpoint. Mm-hmm. What they were really trying to do is imply, well, this is business, why you should pay for this. That's really what they were trying to do. I actually think this is one of the first times where we're seeing in a while where digital transformation is actually transforming the business. Now, obviously, we could use the term business transformation, AI transformation. But I think it's interesting because this whole digital transformation journey has been very, to me, technology led. I feel like we're really seeing a flip to business driven transformation, which I'm sure somebody has coined a term that I haven't picked up yet. But I think it's an interesting thing because I think everything you've just talked about and mentioned is this business driven side. And I guess you can reflect on that, but the question maybe in there as well is when you think about your role, obviously you're in support of the business. Has your view of your role, your participation in what AI can do, has it changed, or is it, you've always trying to deliver solutions and it is just a different tool for you?
It's just an accelerator. It's allowing me to do things that faster. I'm seeing my team jump into new areas or build new models that they've never built before and like have the confidence to do that. I don't think it's changing the fundamentals. It's still a business. It's still the basics of a business. And those fundamentals just haven't changed. And AI is just an accelerator to help us move quickly through either generating more revenue, through new novel ways to drive value to our customers, or it's about, driving cost and optimization so we can redeploy resources in other places.
I love it. Cameron, if somebody, well, first of all, thank you for your time. And I think these are good discussions because there's a lot of talk about where AI is going. I think we forget that, like you just said, it's accelerating, it's an accelerator, it's helping the business do things faster. I think sometimes in us geeking out about the technology, we forget that's really where we're here for. If somebody does have a follow-up question, if somebody wants to maybe pick your brain, I know you mentioned you guys have a framework, somebody would be like, ooh, we don't have one, maybe she can share. Is there a good way of kind of following up with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best spot. I'm there pretty often. My first and last name is Cameron Hetrick, and you can find me right there on LinkedIn. And it's Cameran, so it's a little bit of a unique spelling. So.
Yes, and Hetrick is H-E-T, not first.
Not a 3-point on the goal.
I had to clarify that one.
Yeah.
I really do appreciate your time. Thank you again for being on.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. I'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think we had a great discussion here. Cameron went through and talked to us about some of the opportunities ahead of us, how important data is, where you should be starting, what you should be thinking about. Actually, she's helping her team understand some of the business side pieces that they're going to need to deliver these solutions. So kind of fits everything we've always been hearing, and she did a great job of articulating those points with us. So share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from it as well. Also, please subscribe. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.